U.S. Representative Mike Flood rushed to condemn the juvenile driver of the red SUV in the January 29, 2026 Fremont High School anti-IC protest, not because he cared about facts or justice, but because he had clear ulterior motives rooted in direct financial and political conflicts of interest. Flood's own media empire, Flood Communications, owns and operates Nebraska's largest Spanish-language radio and TV outlets, Radio Lobo, Fiesta 94.5 FM, and Telemundo Nebraska, which generates significant revenue from Latino and immigrant customers and advertisers. These businesses thrive on the very demographic targeted by IC enforcement actions. By framing the teenage driver as a violent aggressor who hit a peaceful protester, Flood protected the narrative that benefits his customer base, his donors in agriculture and meatpacking, industries dependent on cheap immigrant labor, and the political networks that keep those interests flowing. His statements were never about protecting students. They were a calculated, self-serving performance designed to shield his bottom line and his pro-immigrant donor class while pretending to be a voice of moral outrage. Flood's exact ex-post on the evening of January 29, 2026, set the tone for the entire deception. This is not what we do in Nebraska. This is not okay. The video of the girl being hit by a car at the school protest is disturbing. While initial reports say the girl was alert and talking when she was taken away, we are praying for her and her well-being. The incident needs to be fully investigated by law enforcement. It is critical that our country preserve the ability of people to safely protest. In follow-up interviews and a February 1, 2026 WOWT media call, he doubled down, calling the incident tragic, praising Fremont schools, offering to help the district, and claiming Fremont is going to get through this, while noting it continued the national conversation on IC. These were not off-the-cuff remarks. They were part of a scripted, coordinated barrage with Governor Jim Pillen, Senators Pete Ricketts and Deb Fischer, and Representatives Don Bacon and Adrian Smith. The near-identical language across all statements. Political violence is never okay. Preserve the ability of people to safely protest. Nebraska is better than this. Proves staff-level coordination through Nebraska GOP channels, signal groups, and shared talking point memos. Flood. And the others simply personalized the same false script. The statements were not just wrong. They were provably false the moment they were posted. Multiple independent video angles captured the exact sequence. The female student protester ran directly into the path of the moving red SUV. The juvenile driver had no realistic chance to stop. The vehicle was surrounded by a hostile crowd, yelling threats, hitting the car, and stealing the Trump flag. Police never charged the driver with hitting or assaulting anyone, only with leaving the scene, an action justified by the mob threat. The student herself was cited for being a pedestrian in the roadway, a victim of indoctrination, and incitement by the adult faculty and staff of the school, who supported the protest on school grounds. Flood and every other politician had immediate access to this footage. They watched it. Their staffs watched it. Yet they deliberately chose language that painted the teenage driver as a violent assailant using his vehicle to assault a legal protester. This was not a mistake. It was a conscious lie that exposed Flood as both too incompetent to evaluate basic video evidence and too corrupt to care about the truth when his financial interests were at stake. Flood's media empire makes the deception even more damning. Headquartered in Norfolk, Nebraska, Flood Communications owns Radio Lobo, Nebraska's flagship Spanish-language station, Fiesta 94.5 FM, Central Nebraska's first full-power Spanish station, and Telemundo Nebraska. These outlets are marketed directly to Latino and immigrant communities, the same communities that form a growing part of his advertising revenue and political constituency. Flood has openly bragged about this expansion as a smart business move to reach the fastest growing population in the state. By rushing to defend the right to peacefully protest against ICE and falsely accusing the red SUV driver, Flood was quietly shielding the very demographic that keeps his stations profitable and his donor network happy. The conflict of interest is blatant and indefensible. This was not an isolated error in judgment. Flood continued the false narrative in multiple interviews and public appearances days later, long after police citations made the truth obvious. He called the incident tragic and offered help to the school district, while still implying the driver was at fault. The other Nebraska politicians followed the same dishonest script. None of them, not Flood, not Pillen, not any of them, ever issued a retraction, correction, or clarification. They simply let the false narrative linger, then moved on to the next news cycle. That silence is damning. It proves the statements were never about protecting students or seeking justice. They were about advancing a political and financial agenda that benefits Flood's media business, his agriculture and meatpacking donors who rely on cheap immigrant labor, and the investment networks, including ties to firms like BlackRock and Vanguard that influence both media ownership and political funding, that profit from the status quo. The entire performance was intrusive, unnecessary, and deeply harmful. This was a local incident between two high school students. It required no congressional grandstanding, no statewide condemnation, and no performative outrage from a U.S. representative. Flood and the others inserted themselves anyway, using inflammatory language that prejudged a juvenile, pressured local authorities, and stigmatized both teenagers involved. The driver was falsely branded a violent thug. The student was turned into a helpless victim when video clearly showed she ran into traffic under adult supervision and direction at the school. The statements accomplished nothing positive. They only amplified division, harmed two young people, and revealed the staggering incompetence and moral bankruptcy of the politicians who made them. Flood's actions expose him as a typical Nebraska political opportunist, phony, self-serving, and willing to lie about clear video evidence to protect his wallet and his donors. He watched the same footage everyone else saw. He knew the student ran into the car. He knew the driver was fleeing a threatening mob. Yet he chose to push a false narrative that supported anti-ICE protesters and the industries that rely on the very illegal immigrant labor ICE targets. This was not leadership. It was a calculated, backhanded way to signal support for illegal alien interests without saying the words outright. In the end, Flood and the rest of Nebraska's political class losers and phonies used an isolated school accident to grandstand, push donor-friendly narratives, and score cheap political points. They had the video. They had the facts. They chose lies anyway. No retractions. No apologies. No accountability. Just silence once the news cycle moved on. That is the real story of Mike Flood's statements on the Fremont incident, not outrage over political violence, but a textbook example of a corrupt politician putting business interests, donor cash, and political posturing ahead of truth, justice, and the well-being of two Nebraska teenagers. The people of Nebraska deserve far better than this kind of fraudulent, self-serving performance from their elected representatives.